Good morning. We are in Maseches Shviis, Perek Beis. We're in Mishnah Gimel. That's what we up to. We're going to review outside that which we learned yesterday, and it brought to the forefront the halacha that we've discussed several times as we're learning Shviis, the halacha of Maris Ayin. There are things that a person is prohibited from doing, not because he's doing anything wrong, but because the way it's being done can lead other people to believe and suspect that you are doing something wrong. In terms of halacha, this comes up, and it comes up quite often. If you remember when we were learning Hilchos Chanukah, a person that has two entrances to his house, a front entrance or back entrance, or he has an entrance on the north side and the east side, or the north side and the west side, etc. He has two entrances to his house. The question becomes, does he have to light two menorahs at each entrance because of Maris Ayin? People will be walking on one side of the house and know that a Yid is living there and don't see a menorah there, they will suspect he's not lighting Hanukkah candles. And this is the sugya in the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Chaf Gimel. Where exactly do we learn out Maris Ayin from? So there are different places that Chazal seem to point to for the source of this halacha, and whether there are multiple sources or whether each source teaches me something else in Maris Ayin is a question amongst the Mefarshim. We also, for example, when we were learning Maseches Shkolim, we learned that the person who went into the room that held the Maktzis HaShekel in it and had to make a withdrawal from the room in order to buy animals or other things for the Beis HaMikdash, he had to go in there without his shoes on, without his sandals on, without a belt on. He had to go in there with his robe that didn't have a hem on it. And all these halachas are Maris Ayin, Shelo Yomru. People should not say that he went in there and took a Maktzis HaShekel and hid it for himself in a belt, in a shoe, etc. We have this halacha, Maris Ayin, by Peah, when you take Peah in your field. That's one of the sources in the Gemara on Shabbos. A farmer has to leave a certain amount of his field, a corner of his field, for poor people. When does he leave that corner? At the beginning, when he's cutting the field, or at the end? And the answer is at the end. And the Gemara gives different reasons, and one of them is so that people shouldn't suspect that you don't leave Peah. The Gemara discusses what that issue is. In contemporary times, when we were learning Maseches Shkolim, we brought this as an example. In contemporary times, there was a question brought to the Poskim, including Rav Moshe Feinstein's and Roman Tzaddik Lebracha, Shabbos clocks. When Shabbos clocks first came into existence, the question was, is a Yid allowed to use a Shabbos clock on Shabbos? Because a person, not everybody, in fact, when they came out, not everybody, many people were familiar with a Shabbos clock.
Excuse me, Rabbi, can you mute everyone?
And so they're looking in someone's apartment window, and they see lights going on and lights going off on Shabbos. And they suspect that he became a Mechalel Shabbos, Chas v'Shalom. So until Rav Moshe dealt with the Shaila Shabbos clocks, but until it became so established that there's such a thing as a Shabbos clock, and people therefore have no reason to suspect another Yid, there was a question about whether it can be used by Jewish people. Now, someone can say, well, what's the Shaila? Just let people keep on doing it until everyone gets used to it, and then it'll become permissible. We understand that that's not a halachic route to go. Just everybody do it, and once everybody does it, the problem will go away. That's not the way halacha generally deals with a problem. So There was a shaila about the Shabbos clock. There was a shaila about parva milk. Can you use parva milk? Maris ayin. You come to a wedding or you go to a restaurant and you order a coffee and they give you that little jug to pour the creamer into it. It looks exactly like milk. So in those days, before people became familiar with non-dairy creamer, people would leave a box on the table. Either the box of the non-dairy creamer would be on the table and you would pour right out of the box into your coffee, or you would put it into the nice little jug, but you would put the empty box on the table so people should know that it's parva milk. It's not necessary today because we understand as parva milk. The question of parva ice cream. All these shilas come up because of maris ayin. Chazal were very, very sensitive about maris ayin in Shemitah because it's one reason is because such a public mitzvah. It's not something going on in the privacy of your home. It's a wide open field, and people have fields that the neighboring fields. And you can see your friend in the next field, he's bringing out piles of manure into his field during Shemitah, and you begin to suspect that he's fertilizing his field. Fertilizing a field is rabbinically prohibited, not biblically prohibited, but nevertheless, it's still maris ayin that he is violating a rabbinic prohibition. So we begin. The point of this parak for us right now is this whole idea of maris ayin, how sensitive Chazal were to what other people think you are doing. And from there, chas v'shalom, they say if he's doing it, must be okay. Or if he's doing it and he's getting away with it, I can get away with it. And Shemitah is a very sensitive time. People's, in an agricultural society, people's entire parnasa is at stake. You give up working your field for a whole year, person's parnasa is at stake. And when you see someone else doing something, you say, oh, if he's doing it, must be okay, I'm going to do it too. So Chazal were very sensitive, lest chas v'shalom, the whole Shemitah fall by the wayside. So Mishnah Aleph and Mishnah Beis yesterday discussed how much the way they used to stockpile manure was the animals, cows, bulls, the animals would be in a corral and the manure would gather there, and every so often the owner of the animals would shovel out the manure and take it into the field and create piles in the field, and eventually when he needed the manure, he would spread it in the field. Can you do that during Shemitah? So in Mishnah Beis on page 416, we learned that you can in a Beit Sa'ah, that famous Beit Sa'ah, 50 amas by 50 amas, you can create 3 piles, no more than 3 piles, and each pile has to be a minimum of 10 boxes of manure, and each box has to hold a lesser, whatever the measurements are. Let's make believe a lesser is a pound. And each box has to hold a pound. In order to be permitted to make a pile in the field in Shemitah, you have to have a pile that's 10 boxes of manure. Each box is a pound. That means each pile is going to be 10 pounds of manure. It can't be less, but it could be more. The point is the bigger the stockpile is, the less people will suspect you're fertilizing your field. It becomes crystal clear you're creating a pile. You're not fertilizing. You don't fertilize a field by creating mountains of fertilizer. What you do is you spread it around the field. So the bigger the pile becomes, the less people will suspect that you are actually fertilizing the field. They understand that you're storing it. So each pile, there can only be 3 piles. That's picture 65 on page 416. There can only be 3 piles. Each pile is at least 10 mashpelot, and each mashpel is a lesser. So each box is a pound, and each one of those piles is 10 pounds. Each pile in the picture 65 on page 416 is 10 10 pounds, just for the sake of simplicity. And that's all you can do. The Mishnah then said on page 416 on the last line, Mosifin al hamash pelot, you can add the amount of boxes of manure to each pile, meaning you can only have 3 piles, but each pile can be 10 pounds, 12 pounds, 20 pounds. It can't be less than 10. Less than 10 is a small amount, and that would give people the impression you're fertilizing the field. At 10, you've got a stockpile. 12 is even better. 15 is even better. 20 is even better. So therefore, the Mishnah says, Mosifin ala mashpelos, a person is allowed to add to each pile and make the pile bigger. Ve'ein mosifin al hashpatot, but you can't add to the number of piles themselves. The piles must remain no more than 3. Page 417, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and he says, Af al ha'ashpatot. Not only can you add additional manure to each of the 3 piles, you can even add additional piles. You can have 4 piles, you can have 5 piles, you can have 6 piles. Now continues Rabbi Shimon in Mishnah Gimel, where we're up to. Osa Adam Esodeu Sholosh Sholosh Ashpatos Lebeitza, which is what we just learned. A person can make 3 piles in a Beitza. Yesemikan, and if you want to make more piles, Machziv. Machziv is an interesting word. That's all Rabbi Shimon is saying is Divrei Rabbi Shimon. This is again Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Rabbi Shimon is saying that not only can you have more than 3 piles in the Beit Sa'ah, you don't even have to have 10 pounds in each pile. And the Mefarshim explained, Yerushalmi explains that Rabbi Shimon holds that you're allowed to have multiple piles in a Beit Sa'ah. You're not limited to 3. And not only that, each pile can be anywhere above 3 pounds, not 10 pounds. So whereas the first opinion in the Mishnah said you can have 3 piles and that's it in a Beit Sa'ah, and each pile has to be a minimum of 10 pounds, and you can add to the 10 pounds. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with both those statements. He says, first of all, you can have more than 3 piles in a Beit Sa'ah, and each pile is not a minimum of 10 pounds. Each is a minimum of 3 pounds. The Chachamim say this is not permissible. You're only allowed to have 3 piles. Ad sheyamik shlosha. If you want to have more than 3 piles, then you have to dig a hole in the field that's 3 tfachim deep, and then you can start making a 4th pile. O ad sheyagbia shlosha. Or you take some rock and you make a mound 3 tfachim high, and then you can have a 4th pile. Take a look at picture 70. It's showing you, according to the Chachamim, you can only have 3 piles. If you want to have a 4th pile, then the 4th pile is going to have to be either you dig out part of the field and you put the manure in there and you pile it up inside this little hole, 3 tfachim deep, or you build a mound 3 tfachim high and you put the 4th pile on that. What does this do? If anyone's suspicious of you that you're making a lot of piles of manure in your field because you're fertilizing, you have just shown them you're not fertilizing. You have the 3 that are permitted according to the halacha, and the 4th, to demonstrate that you're not violating the halacha and you have no intention of fertilizing your field, you put it on a mound or you put it inside a little hole that you dig in the ground. Osa, next halacha on page 418. Osa Adam as Ziblo Otzer, a person, you take a look at picture 71 on page 418. Picture 71 shows you the that a person is making one huge stockpile. And here the Mishnah says, if you want to make one stockpile in your field, you can make it as big as you want. In other words, you don't have to have 3 of 10 pounds. You can make one huge one of 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds, because then clearly people know that you're not fertilizing your field. Nevertheless, Rabbi Meir says that this is not permitted to make one big stockpile. Rabbi Meir forbids this. Rabbi Meir holds that if you want to take the 30 pounds and you want to have the 30 pounds in 3 piles, that's fine. If you want to take the 30 pounds and put it into one pile, that's also fine. But if you want to create a pile that's more than 30 pounds, then you have to do the same kind of thing. Yamik shlosha, dig a hole 3 tvachim deep and begin your big pile. O achiak bia shlosha, or make a mound underneath it and high, and then store 72. On page 419, it's showing you Reb Meir Shita. Reb Meir holds, if you want to stockpile 30 in one pile instead of 10 in 3 piles, that's okay. That's the picture on the left in 72. The picture on the right of 72 is one you want to stockpile even more than 30 in one place. There, Reb Meir says you have to create a mound underneath, or you need to dig a hole in the field and stockpile it above that. Okay, so now we've talked a lot about these halachas, but now we have a big question here. How do you create these mounds of 10 pounds? What are you required to do? Do you have to bring out the whole 10 pounds in one time, and then a second 10 pounds, and then a third 10 pounds? How do you do this? If you have a corral of cows, steers, whatever, do you have to wait till you have 30 pounds worth of manure in the corral, and then you can start shoveling it out to 3 piles? How does this work? Or can you slowly bring it out to the field? So the last word on page 418 says, Hoyeloi dova muit, if you have a little manure. Mosif alava holech, you can take it out slowly and create 1 pile, 2 piles, 3 piles. Now, I remind you, you can only start taking this out. Go back to Mishnah Aleph in this perek, page 414. When can you start taking out the manure to create the piles? In the year of Shemitah, in the 7th year, when can you start taking the manure out of the corrals and create piles? So there were 3 shitas. The Tanakam, the Reb Meir said, when the sinners who violate Shemitah stop doing it, then you can begin bringing it out, the manure. Rabbi Yehuda says when it dries up. Rabbi Yossi says when it's so dry that it becomes knotty, whatever the case is. What we are talking about now, whatever we're talking about, taking manure out into the field, whatever sheet that you're talking about, 3 piles, 4 piles, 1 big pile, we're only talking about after the time it becomes permissible to take out the manure to the field. Until that point of time, you're not allowed to do any of this. But once that point passed, let's use Rebbe Yehuda for simplicity. The manure has dried out. The manure is dried out. You can start creating your piles. How do you create the piles? You have to take out 30 pounds at one time and create 3 piles? No. The Mishnah says, last word on page 418, Hoyelo dova muit. Once the time comes that you're permitted to bring the manure out into the field, you can bring it out slowly. Mosef alav v'holech, and you bring a little at a time until you have a pile of 10, and the second pile of 10, and the third pile of 10, everyone according to everybody's shita, how you do it. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah Oser. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah holds you're not allowed to do this. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says this is not going to work. if it's even after the time you're allowed to bring out manure to the field, let's say it's after the manure has hardened, and you're going to take out a little every day, it really looks like you're fertilizing your field. That's how people do it. They bring out a little every day. So while it's true that the manure has hardened, but someone looking at it sees he's bringing out a tiny amount today and then a tiny amount tomorrow and a tiny amount the next day, it looks like he is fertilizing his fields. Therefore, Belos ben Azariah holds that you're not allowed to bring it out a little at a time. If you want to bring it out a little at a time, same thing. Achiyamik shlosha, dig a little hole in the field of 3 tfachim and start putting a little in there and every day build up the pile. Oshiak bia shlosha, or create a mound and start bringing out a little each day until you create the pile of 10 pounds. O, page 420, achiyitin alasela, or find a big rock and start bringing out a little manure each day and put it on the rock. If you put it on the rock, everybody knows you're not fertilizing it. If you wanted to fertilize the field, you wouldn't put the manure on the rock. You put it directly on the ground. So that's the difference of opinion. The first opinion says that once the time comes that you're allowed to take manure into the field, then you can take it out slowly and slowly create the piles in the field. Belos ben Azariah says if you want to bring it out slowly, you have to dig a hole, make a mound, or put it on a rock. If you want to bring out 10 pounds in one time, that's fine. If you want to bring it out less than that slowly, you must dig a hole, make a mound, or put it on a rock. Okay. Now, Mishnah Dalet on page 420. We are, if you want to actually become very familiar with these halachas of when you can take out manure, how much manure you can take out, at the bottom of page 420, there's a chart of the Shviis. Okay. Mishnah Dalet raises a new question. It also has to deal with how to remove manure from the field. Now, don't get nervous. The whole perek is not about manure. There are other issues that are going to come up in this perek, starting Mishnah Hay. Somebody has a field and he wants to dig his field to remove stones. He wants to remove stones from his field. That also raises problems. He's got a shovel, he's digging his field, and he wants to take out stones. He has a lot of stones in his field, and he needs the stones to build something. He wants to build a barbecue, wants to build a house. Can you dig to remove stone from your field? Onlookers think you're digging your field to plant. Again, it's going to be all kinds of shilas of maris ayin. So when we talk about what you can do in your field in Shemitah, it's not only about what you can do and what you cannot do. There's a lot of halachas about what you cannot do because someone will see it and get the wrong impression of what you're doing, maris ayin. Mishnah Dalet, page 420. Hamadayer es sadeyu. Someone has a wide open field, and it's Shemitah, and he has a whole bunch of cattle. And since he's not going to be working his field, let's make believe it's a grain field. He's already cut down the grain in the 6th year. The field is empty. He has a whole bunch of cattle, and he wants to build a corral in the field. So Hamadayu es sadeyu, someone that's going to build a corral in his field, and he wants to do this in Shemitah. O sasar lebeit sasayim. He can make a machitza, he can make a wall, and that's the picture you have in 75. He builds a wall of sasayim. Sasayim is double a beit sa'ah. Remember, we learned that famous Beit Sa'ah about a tree field. We learned the Beit Sa'ah just a few moments ago. You can have 3 piles of manure in a Beit Sa'ah. Beit Sa'ah is 50 amos by 50 amos, 2,500 amos, 50 by 50. Sosayim is 2 sa'ah. It's double the size. So on page 76, you have a picture of a Beit Sasayim. Instead of 50 by 50, it's 100 by 50 or 5,000 square amas, double the size of a Beit Sa'ah. So first the Mishnah says, Osa Sahar Lebeit Sasayim. You could make an enclosure in an area of 5,000 square amos, and in those 5,000 square amos, take a look at picture 76, you have a big field. In that field, to start with, you can make an enclosure of 5,000 square amos and put the animals in there, and manure will accumulate in that 5,000 amos. At some point, that 5,000 amos is going to become full with manure, and the animals can't live there anymore. What do? Oke sholosh ruchos, you take apart 3 of the walls. Umeniach es emtsoyis, you leave the middle wall. Nimtza medayer beit aba'at se'in. The result of this is that you will have enclosed 4 se'in. You will have enclosed an area of 10,000 amos. Take a look at picture 77 on page 421. What has the person done? Take a look. There are 2 rectangles. The top rectangle is gray. The bottom rectangle is white. The top rectangle is where the farmer started. He created the first sasayim, created 4 walls, and he kept his animals in those 4 walls of 5,000 square amos, and the manure filled up in there, showing you that in the picture, and the animals can't live there anymore. What do? Remove the left wall, the right wall, and the top wall, and bring them down the field. The top wall remains, and then you bring down the left wall, the right wall, and the bottom wall. So again, you have 4 walls, but now you have a place where the animals can live that's manure-free. And what do? Now, the manure that accumulated in the top rectangle, you can now remove that manure and make 3 piles in the field of 10 pounds each pile. And now, in the meantime, the animals have a second place to live, the lower rectangle. So at the end of this process, the farmer was given permission to build a gate initially around Beit Sasayim, 5,000 amos. And then he flipped the gate and he got another 5,000 amos, which is 10,000 amos. When you put it all together, he has a Beit Abba Se'in. He has 4 Se'in. Okay? Every Sa'ah is 50 by 50, 2,500. The first triangle is 5,000. I'm sorry, the first rectangle is 5,000. The rectangle below it is 5,000. So he's been given permission to use 10,000 square amos of his field to be able to corral the animals, and he now has a clean place for the animals to live. He removes the manure from the top rectangle. Bottom line is, he was given permission to use the field 4 sa'ah, which equals 10,000 amos. Last word on page 421. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that that he's more lenient. Base Shmonat Se'in. You can go all the way up to 10 Se'in. Okay. Take a look at picture 79. Look at what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel lets you use. The middle rectangle is the first place he put his animals. Manure collected there. He can flip to the right, he can flip to the left, he can flip above, and he can flip below. He ends up being able to create 4 additional rectangles besides the original rectangle in the middle. He flips over the fence to the top, the bottom, the right, and the left. He ends up with 4 additional places for his animals to be able to live and to collect manure in there. So Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer Beis Shmona Tze'in, you can go all the way up to 8 Tze'in besides the middle one, right? Each box, in picture 79, there are 5 boxes. 5 boxes, 5 boxes are more than 8, but Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, more than Shmona Tze'in. The second line on page 422 says Reb Shimon Gamliel permits 8 Tze'in. Here you have 10 Tze'in. You have 5 boxes. Each of them is 2 Tze'in, Beit Sasayim. So you have 10. Reb Shimon Gamliel is not counting the middle one. He's saying the middle one, and then I'm giving you 4 more boxes, which equal 8,000 more Tze'in. Now Reb Shimon Gamliel says, Hoisa kol sadeu beis abad Tze'in. What happens if, and that's not necessarily even be Reb Shimon Gamliel. Take a look at picture 80. Picture 80 on page 423. Let's say a person's entire field was abad Tze'in. His whole field is the 4 Tze'in. So if you take a look at page 421, picture 77. The original concept was you get to create 1 corral of a sasayim, and you can flip the fence and create another base sasayim, so you get 4 Tze'in. But in picture 77, the 2 rectangles are only a small portion of the greater field. There's a huge field around it. What happens if the entire field is only base abad Tze'in, which means that the farmer is going to be using the whole field as a corral and to collect manure? And that's the picture on page 423, picture 80. What happens if the entire field is the Beit Sasayim, is Abba Sasayim? So the Mishnah says on page 422, Hoisa kol sadeu beis abad Tze'in. The whole field, you take a look on picture 80, the whole field is only Abba Tze'in, right? Again, what's a Sa'ah? 50 by 50, 2,500 square amos. 4 of such areas is 2,500 times 4 equals 10,000 square amos. Picture 80, they're showing you 100 by 100. That's 10,000 square amos. So let's make believe that the whole field is only 10,000 square amos. Are you still allowed to do the flipping the fence? You create 1 rectangle, you flip the fence, you create the second rectangle, and now the entire field has been used for cattle and manure collection. Can you do that? So the Mishnah says, the whole field is only 4 Tze'in. You cannot create a corral in the whole field. You have to leave over a little. So you take a look at picture 80. You make corral number 1 at the top. You make it the sasayim, 5,000 square amos. The rectangle at the bottom that you flip to, you can't make another 5,000 because then the whole place would be cattle and manure. You have to leave a little. It's showing you with the arrow, Mishayir, Miktas, Minasod. You have to leave a little over. Why? Mishnah, last words on page 22. Mepnei Maris Ha'ayin. Those are big words. Maris Ayin. People will suspect, they're looking and they will suspect that you are doing nothing more than fertilizing a field. If you are looking at picture 76 on page 421 or picture 77 on page 421, there's a big field with two small corrals in it. Okay, so the person has a field and he's doing what he needs to do for his animals. If you take a look at picture A on page 423, if you build a corral in the whole field, it's Marisayin. Then it begins to look, the person is setting up his cattle in different places so that the cattle will fertilize the field. That's prohibited. Umotzi min asar, and you take out from each corral, v'nosin l'soch sadeu k'derech ha'mezaplin. And every time you're finished with one rectangle, whatever the shita is, if it's a Shimon Gamliel, you get to make 5 rectangles. If it's the Tanakam, you get to make 2 rectangles. After you finish with a rectangle, you remove the manure into 3 piles into the field, each pile being 10 pounds as we use the hypothetical measurement, and then you flip it and create the next rectangle. Okay, so all these halachas, we got the big word there on page 422, the last words, maris ha'ayin. It's maris ha'ayin. People are looking at what you're doing and they get the wrong impression. They think you're fertilizing your field, which you're not. You have no intention of doing that. But because this is such a public mitzvah, everybody sees everybody doing what they're doing in the field. We don't want people to get the false impression that he's doing it, I can do it, or he's violating Shviis, and therefore these things become prohibited. Okay, so now up to Mishnah Hey. We'll continue next time. And this begins the question of Lo yiftach adam machzeh b'tchilas sadeu. Can you start digging in your field? You want to create a quarry. You know that under your field there are a lot of rocks, and you want to dig out the rocks. You want to build something. So you want to dig the field just to get the rocks. Can you do that? So that'll be the subject of the next mission.